Okay, so we got our Supreme Court nominee here. As a reminder of the issue, there's a constitutional convention in Canada that Supreme Court justices need to be from certain regional areas of the country. I believe it's 3 in Quebec, 3 in Ontario, 1 out east in the Atlantic provinces, which are New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador. The eastern part of Quebec is also an Atlantic area, but Quebec is not considered an Atlantic province usually. And I guess it's one from BC, and is it 1 or 2 from out west? I don't know. But there's a breakdown, and it's understood to be a convention, a constitutional norm. Now in Canada, our constitution consists of the written document and unwritten rules and conventions, and it's kind of you've heard people arguing otherwise, but these arguments are not really serious and should not be taken seriously. I think that pretty much everybody is going to agree that the breakdown of the Supreme Court is a constitutional convention, and it has been ruled repeatedly that constitutional conventions are a part of the Constitution. Meaning that the Constitution is not just the things that are written on a piece of paper, but it's see, in the United States they have the concept of a living document. In Canada, it's actually even more abstract than that. It's not just a living document. You don't have to actually amend the Constitution to create a constitutional norm. You just have to establish it. And part of the reason we have Canada didn't have a constitution until recently, right? Or we had a constitution, but it was not really a constitution. The Canadian Constitution actually comes from 1982. Yeah, 1982, guys. There was something that came out of 1867, but it's kind of a stretch to call it a constitution. It was an agreement of a bunch of provinces to join together into a federation. And a division of powers, but it's not a constitution in the sense of the United States. And you have to keep in mind that Canada didn't have a revolution. Canada is still a Commonwealth country, but we have, since patriation in 1982, we have largely separated ourselves from the British Empire. But that didn't really happen legally until 1982. I keep saying that, 1982. 1982. Alright? 34 years ago. Lots and lots of people are alive today that were alive before patriation. In fact, I was only 1 year old. I was alive before patriation, technically. So our Constitution is very young, and it's still kind of in the process of being worked out, kind of thing. But what I was trying to say was that you have to put it in the context of Britain, which does not have a constitution. It's one of the big differences between the United States and the United Kingdom is that the United States has a constitution. It is a constitutional republic, whereas the United Kingdom does not have a constitution. It just has a set of norms, and its court and its laws and everything are based on unwritten norms. So Canada is kind of a hybrid there, right? It's in between. We do have a written constitution, but we have a tradition going back before 1982 of relying on unwritten norms. And I think that that's probably where the young Dauphin here got messed up. And he may have even had advisors that were mistaken in taking kind of a literalist, American-centric kind of concept of the Constitution, without realizing that, okay, Canada is not an American state. Canada is a British colony, and our norms are, we didn't have that break in history. We didn't have a revolution. Our norms are direct descendants rather than, we didn't, in the United States, the norms are direct descendants as well, too, but it went through kind of that portal of revolution, right? There was that kind of year zero. We don't have that year zero here. we have continuity all the way through. So there was never really any serious question that the regional breakdown was a part of the Constitution, even though it's not written specifically, but because it's a part of the unwritten conventions, and that's the way that the British tradition of constitutional law works, of which Canada is a descendant of. That said, this has never happened before, so there's no ruling. And had Trudeau gone ahead and ignored the geographical representation and just appointed, let's say, an Aboriginal trial lawyer from BC instead of a trial judge from the Atlantic provinces, somebody would have taken it to court, and, like I say, nobody thinks the government would have won, except this small group of people that are trying to interpret the Constitution literally, which the court is not going to do. So yes, there were people saying that, what he was doing was constitutional, but, and they were getting media coverage and everything, but they were completely wrong. And I think everybody that really kind of understood the situation in a deeper way knew that it's not even really, it was never even really a serious question. Okay, so the government retreated. It realized that this is an argument it can't win, and it did go ahead and nominate a court justice from the Atlantic provinces, Newfoundland specifically. And I happen to know that I don't think Newfoundland has ever had a Supreme Court justice, so he got his little identity politics in. Newfoundland didn't join Canada until 1949. Newfoundland was its own country before then, or its own colony before then. It was still British protectorate, but that's probably a good part of the reason why it's never had a Supreme Court justice. And in fact, there does still remain an independence movement in Newfoundland. You can kind of think of Newfoundland a little bit like Texas, right? Kind of late to the party, and there's still some people that didn't kind of want to go, right? So in the end, things appear to have worked out the way that they should. So let me close this thought. There are several reacts that are related to this, so I'm just going to close this down. For all my yelling and screaming about the government broadcasting contempt for constitutional norms, it seems to continually fall in line in the end, meaning that the party is in fact still in charge, even if it has to find ways to do gymnastics around this guy from time to time. Thank God. Like I say, he's very likable. He's an affable guy. You want to like him. You want to vote for him. He passes the beer test with flying colors. But he's not qualified for this job. And the only way he can be doing this is if he has advisors around him that are very, very much helping him out. Okay? It's nice to see that the party won in the end. It's reassuring. Now, I don't know anything about this guy that he picked, or if the pick is any good or not. That's kind of secondary, and I'm going to explain why. That might seem flippant, start yelling and screaming, and then he picks somebody I've never even heard of him, and I'm praising it even though I've never heard of him. Let me explain. But the Prime Minister of Canada doesn't have a lot of checks and balances. The court is the strongest one. It's important that a new Prime Minister demonstrate respect for the Constitution because there isn't really anything that's going to get in the way of bad judgment beside a court ruling after the fact. Okay, which just kind of demonstrates the point. He's got to pick good justices because the justices are the only people that are going to tell him that he fucked up. We have one house. We have a Senate, but it's a rubber stamp. So in theory, things can happen very fast here. Because we only have we have an elected dictator. Not exactly. We have an elected dictator and a Supreme Court that can overrule it. And the Supreme Court really, in a lot of ways, has more power than the Parliament does. but we don't have these parliaments fighting with each other, and so we don't have that gridlock. But that means we don't have the balance. Whenever the judges merit that the Constitutional Convention was followed is of paramount importance in establishing that respect. We need to know that the Prime Minister isn't going to be a dictator. It's important. So whenever we have this new Prime Minister, it's kind of a test that the new Prime Minister has to pass. There's nobody really stopping him from doing what he wants, so he has to demonstrate that he's going to stop himself. Which is why we have these big movements, right? Maybe I can rephrase that. I say that we don't have checks and balances. Well, we're the checks and balances. I'm a check. The media is a check. The bar is a check. And we have to be vigilant about it. We can't rely on the other house to stop it. We got to stand up and do it, right? So I might calm down a little. Not too much. I have to stay vigilant. That's the whole point. We'll see. But he did make the right choice. Now, but what I was saying here, I want to point out that the Canadian legal system is not supposed to be partisan. So I say I've never heard of this guy. There's not a lot of reason to be concerned, okay? We don't have a concept of electing judges. So they often don't identify as members of political parties at all. We don't get these stacked courts or these partisan opinions. We don't have these, we don't have this idea of the liberals control the court, or the conservatives control the court, or, a party line ruling. Like, these aren't concepts that exist in our jurisprudence. Our judges really are, the political perspective of our judges is not made explicit. You can kind of infer it by their rulings. But when a liberal appoints somebody, a liberal doesn't appoint a liberal. And a conservative doesn't appoint a conservative. In fact, the conservatives have appointed a lot of liberals because they've had very limited options. Oftentimes, conservatives end up appointing liberals because that's all that exists in the system. Because we don't have these... I say we don't have a partisan court. We don't have a partisan court because it's universally agreed upon that the court should be liberal. Basically. Except the last guy. But he didn't have a lot to work with. The current Chief Justice was actually initially appointed by a conservative, although she was a liberal. So she was put in place by a liberal and then promoted, she was made a judge by a liberal and then appointed by a conservative and then promoted by a liberal. Maybe the conservatives would have preferred to pick somebody else. But they got there and they realized, wait a second, all the trial judges are liberals. In fact, this particular judge is broadly seen as neither a liberal nor a conservative, but a libertarian. So, for example, as Chief Justice, and with a court that was appointed almost entirely by conservative prime ministers, she overruled the ban on euthanasia. Let's get our heads around this for a second. Okay? Euthanasia was just thrown out recently by a Supreme Court in Canada that was appointed almost entirely by conservatives. That's just one example. Appointed by conservatives, but they were all liberals because the system is liberal. So I know I was railing against the process and demanding the liberals appoint liberal judges, but I'm just being, I'm a shit disturber, I'm a leftist, I agitate, that's what I do, okay? And I'll keep doing it. But the actual truth is that so long as you're picking from the existing trial judges, i.e. you're not picking a trial lawyer, see, and this is the thing that worried me, right? I don't care what the ethnicity of the judges is. What worried me was that he was going to pick a litigation lawyer or something instead of a trial judge. Somebody that hadn't been vetted, somebody that worked for the oil companies, right? You pick an indigenous trial lawyer that works for the oil companies, and, And there is some thinking that there's a thought process in his government that's thinking like this. But the reality is that if you're picking from existing trial judges in Canada, then you're getting a vetted candidate that's interested in precedent over ideology and is a liberal in an academic meaning of the word. Canada has never been a republic, it's always been a liberal democracy, and its legal system reflects this from the classroom to the courtroom. When you take law courses in Canada, they teach you liberalism. They teach you Mill's, all the precedent from the start to the end, it's all liberal legal theory. There's really no such thing as a conservative judge in Canada. Because it's a liberal country. To the core. Even the last guy, who was extreme by Canadian standards, mostly appointed broadly liberal judges because that's all that existed. And they ruled against his own appointments near the end. Again, you couldn't imagine this in the States, right? The judges that Stephen Harper appointed ruled against him all the time. He stacked the court. If you look at the court, it's like, I think he's got 8 of the judges are from him. And they were constantly ruling against him. You couldn't imagine that. Could you imagine Republican judges ruling against the Republicans over and over again? Because the judges in Canada aren't partisan. But they're not partisan because they're all liberals. So there's not a lot of room for poor expectations here. That said, we'll see what happens, right? I'll bite my tongue until I see some reporting. I'm not putting anything past them. Let's define one definition of liberalism. This is what we mean. This is what I mean right now when I say liberalism. A political or social philosophy advocating the freedom of the individual, parliamentary systems of government, non-violent modification of political, social, or economic institutions to assure unrestricted development in all spheres of human endeavor, and government guarantees of individual rights and civil liberties. The last part is really, really key in the Supreme Court in Canada, and in fact in the legal system throughout Canada. It's all about, all of the judges from the lowest courts to the highest courts, they're all about freedom of the individual, they're all about civil rights, they're all about civil liberties. That's Canadian liberalism in context, and it's not a political position, it's the system of government. It's taken for granted. There is no legal jurisprudence in Canada that rejects individual rights and civil liberties. That strain of thinking that does exist in the United States, mostly in the South, it's not even in Alberta. It's not present. All judges, or certainly from, like, if your reference point is the United States, then all judges in Canada are liberal. And that sounds like an absurd statement, but it's actually true. So, like, I mean, it's hard to be concerned. Like I say, I'm going to bite my tongue. I'll wait and see. I could see some report that comes out that says that, wait a second, this guy's a lobbyist or something. But he was a trial judge. And like I say, that was my main concern, that they were going to jump over that. The fact that he's a trial judge, I would be exceedingly surprised to find out that there's going to be much of any controversy that's going to bother me anyways. He may turn out to be more liberal than some people would like. But I don't think there's any possibility that any of the things that I'm concerned about are going to happen. But like I say, we'll find out.